The story begins in Moan Manga Studio, where a man is in a room filled with demon posters. He's on a call with his colleagues, apologizing for not listening to their advice, which led to the studio going bankrupt. The man is hooked up to life support equipment and admits he doesn't have much time left. He expresses how happy he was to create so many stories with them. After saying his goodbyes, the call ends, and he places his hand over his work, realizing that, in the end, his characters are the only ones still with him. As death creeps in, he surprisingly feels a sense of peace. Suddenly, he becomes aware of someone caring for him. Struggling to open his eyes, he sees a girl and asks who she is. Startled, she drops a bucket of water and falls to the floor. The man, confused, tries to figure out why he's there, but the girl quickly runs out, shouting for her mother, saying he's awake. Unable to react, he watches her leave. After gathering some strength, he sits up and notices clothes hanging in the room. Slowly, he gets dressed, realizing that although his body feels weak, he can recover. A knock at the door interrupts his thoughts, and a woman bursts in, addressing him as master. To his shock, the woman is Fong Xingyang, one of the characters from his manga. She throws herself at him, saying she's been waiting for him to wake up for over 6 months. The man, still processing, wonders why one of his own creations is hugging him. When she notices his discomfort, she quickly steps back, apologizing and kneeling in front of him. She explains that she couldn't believe it when Yin told her the master was awake. The man is baffled by her calling him master, but is too stunned to respond. Xingyang then takes his arm and insists the others would be thrilled to see him. As she guides him, she starts introducing the place they're in, a bustling inn. In another room, a man with pointed ears is pouring wine into a glass. Xingyang calls him Ming and announces the master's awakening. The protagonist is shocked to see Ming, another one of his characters, a vampire with a stoic demeanor. Xingyang scolds Ming for not greeting the master properly, but Ming begrudgingly approaches and greets him. She brushes off Ming's attitude, attributing it to his bad mood, and eagerly pulls the master along to meet more people. Soon, other characters from his manga start appearing. There's the dwarf Shuesan, the lumberjack Fanli, the zombie Liangcheng, and the blind Bei. One by one, they greet him warmly. The man realizes that all his characters, the demon kings he created with his colleagues, are here in this strange world. As the realization dawns on him, he remembers his past life as Zheng Fan, the cartoonist who died from a terminal illness. Now, he's somehow been reincarnated into a world populated by the very characters he brought to life in his stories. Xingyang raises a toast, celebrating the master's return and declaring a new beginning for them all. Still confused, Zheng Fan wonders what exactly happened during the 6 months he was asleep, but for now, he's surrounded by his creations, alive and vibrant in this new world. Everyone is impressed with his comment. Bai responds that it was not only the master who suffered something since he was in a coma, for they all became normal people. Zheng wonders if it would be a problem for the demon kings to become normal people and live in an inn near the city, besides wondering why they insist on calling him master. But he understands he cannot lead them to glory and asks where ᴄᴏᴘᴘᴘ was. Xingyang gets worried and asks for a moment as she rises from the table. He watches Xingyang leave and remembers that both she and Bai were creations of his friends, and he just helped. However, ᴄᴏᴘᴘᴘ was a complete creation of his, and imagines he can relax a bit if he sees him. But the demon woman returns with a box and a serious expression mentioning that ᴄᴏᴘᴘᴘ was in that box. Upon opening the box, she shows his stone and says that ᴄᴏᴘᴘᴘ kept saying he did not need to eat or drink. After a while, he sealed himself in that stone. The master decides to relax after the meal and looks at ᴄᴏᴘᴘ's stone, wondering why his creation does not come out of that stone. But the stone does not react to his comments. Our protagonist recognizes that beings like them would never humble themselves before him. With it, he returns the stone to its place and believes the others were only showing a superficial face of themselves. Suddenly, he hears someone complaining because someone would not let Xingyang bandage his hand. Ming had cut his hand with shards and says he is a vampire, while Fanli praises that they no longer have their powers. But the vampire claims his recovery was still faster than humans. Fanli just accepts and says he will take the alcohol to the people, leaving Ming to take care of the broken container alone. Someone approaches him and asks if he was busy. Ming turns and sees the master staring at him at the door, asking if he would like to talk. Zheng asks if he would not sit at the table, and Ming says is disgusting. The master starts a series of questions about the place, while Ming says he does not know how to answer and mentions that Bai might be able to. He says the residents were strange for not having tried to inform themselves and mentions that this is the basics of games. But the vampire responds that they didn't need to be informed since he was in a coma, while Zheng imagines that he is shifting the blame onto the master. At this, Ming says that he didn't need to worry about the residents, which surprises the master. The vampire explains that they thought a lot about the master, but they decided on their own not to abandon him during the coma, and even less now that he has awakened. Zheng is impressed by his comment and believes it would be touching if it were said by Xinjiang instead of Ming. He adds that everyone else abandoned them except the master, and that's why they would do the same for him. As he leaves, he mentions that they were waiting for his return and that Bai should have some notion of the surroundings. With that, Ming goes on his way, leaving the master seated at the table alone. Zheng imagines it as if they knew they were characters in a work and thus recognized him as their master. But he believes he should at least thank them. At that moment, Ming notices something strange and realizes that his hand has healed. In a room, Xuesan tells a story of brother who fusing his fighting spirit into a horse and killing 3,000 people on the battlefield. All the spectators are impressed by his story. The master remembers that Xuesan used to interrupt people and wonders how his readers would react to that. Looking to the side, he recalls that Xinjiang always opened a brothel in his stories regardless of the time or even the world. He remembers seeing this in several stories and imagines if the literary level was declining a lot. Then he wonders if that was a normal world. Bai mentions that there are many separatist regimes in that world, though none are really stable. He adds that everyone he met were normal people. At this, a man appears riding a blue horse with feather-like forms on its legs and face. This makes the master ask if Bai thought that was something simple for a world. But he provokes the Bai, reminding him that he was blind. At night, all the residents gather in front of the master. Zheng explains that Bai had talked about that world and asks if any of them could say anything more. Xinjiang says that it didn't matter because they just wanted to know his decision. She explains that they decided to name the Yin only when he woke up. Until then, they called the Yin Tongfu or long men in reference to the master. The protagonist imagines that even after dying, he would have to decide something like this until he decides that the second name seemed better. But his ally says he didn't even think about it, and the master says it wasn't worth it. He recalls that he liked scary things in his past life, but now he thinks it's a joke for understanding the feeling of being a creation. So he recognizes that in this world, what worries him are his characters, and decides to do something that interests him more. The master returns Mo1's stone to its place, and remembers that the game ends when one stops playing. But he believes he will have no regrets if he is the player himself. Zheng gives orders to Xuesan and Fanlai to get more information and find a place for them. Bai mentions that the patrol cavern's wife was suffering from infertility and would send a water charm to her. Then he sends Xinjiang to receive their guests during the night. The blind man commands Liang Cheng and a Ming to help Xinjiang, so that no one causes trouble because it was the first time for her and the master. The demon woman accepts the orders and says she will charge the guests a considerable price. Our protagonist recognizes that they really organized themselves during those 6 months despite just waiting for him. Xinjiang asks if the food was not to the vampire's liking. Ming says that he really didn't like the food. At nightfall, the master receives information about the progress of their missions. He asks if he could help with anything, and the vampire says he has already helped a lot, which leaves the master irritated, understanding that he would be helping by doing nothing. At this, Ming says that although the auditions are over, the value of the other festivities would be very high. A pair of people approach the inn and say that although they caused many problems, they never came to settle accounts. The master believes it would be best to give up attending to them, and the vampire mentions that it would not be that simple because the strength of their followers was very great, and Xinjiang had already accepted the money even though she couldn't sleep with it. Ming adds that the master can help if he wants. Liancheng waits in front of a staircase, serving as security. When he sees the master approaching, he asks who sent him there, and Zheng says it was of his own volition. He mentions that he will run after breaking a vase, and wonders if everyone thinks he is dead weight. The zombie says he can do whatever he thinks is best, and doesn't need to force himself to do something he doesn't want to. But he adds that the master's safety is his priority. With that, Zheng notes that he cared about his master. Meanwhile, the guest tries to approach Xinjiang, and she tries to keep him occupied. Ming stares at his hand with a stake in it until he pierces his hand that was cut in the morning, and with that he licks the blood from his hands while getting excited with the sensation. Xingyang adjusts her stockings and extends her feet to seduce the guest. She asks if she looked good in those clothes, which excites her guest. The man stares at her excitedly, saying he has never seen anything so beautiful in his life. Then she tries to stall a little more, saying she still had more to show, which makes him even more excited. Xingyang throws herself on the bed and says she could show more if he wanted, and her guest watches her more and more excited. He says he wants while the girl wraps her arms around his neck. Then she says she will show him everything until she gets close to his ear and asks him to wait a bit. More and more she changes her clothes to make the guest more excited. At that moment, the guest's security notices someone approaching and asks what they want. Liang explains that the master brought a famous city wine, and the security says he is not interested. But the zombie says they were ordered to deliver the wine, not to force them to drink it. So the security stares at the protagonist holding the wine vase. At that moment, he tells the two to enter, and Jung thanks him. Our protagonist passes in front of the security while observing the wine vase. Meanwhile, Xingyang adjusts her stockings again. The guest keeps asking her to take off her stockings, and she tries to stall, asking him not to rush while removing them slowly. Xingyang wraps her stocking around the man's neck and pulls him close with her stocking, saying she would give him whatever he wanted. At that moment, she notices something, and the master recognizes that it was the right moment. Zheng strikes the vase on the guard's head with great force while trying to knock him down. Meanwhile, Xingyang tightens her stocking around the man's neck and starts to strangle him. A door bursts open and Ming appears like a shadow, following a hairpin. With the hairpin in hand, the vampire strikes the guest's neck. With that, he collapses unconscious while Ming watches him. The girl asks if he was still alive while recovering from her efforts, but Ming says he took some precautions. However, the guard survived the master's attack and charges at him, drawing his sword. Zheng worries as he sees his enemy approaching him. Lien prepares to help his master and pulls a hidden weapon from his sleeve to strike him from behind. When the swordsman tries to hit the master, a blue flame starts to cover him. Our protagonist is impressed by what happens next. At that moment, the zombie gets hit by the swordsman's attack. Despite this, he manages to land a direct hit on the swordsman and presses harder to cause more damage, and ends up with both being pierced by the attacks. The swordsman recognizes that his opponent was undead. When Lien was about to complete his attack, the guard released a blue light. Jung wonders what that light was, and imagines if it was the swordsman's internal energy or his kai. He notes that this time he found something quite valuable. His enemy stands firm, and the master imagines that he was ready to fight. At that moment, the swordsman realizes that his partner might be in danger. Upon entering the room, the swordsman opens his eyes. The purple aura appears in front of him, and Ming rushes towards him. The swordsman prepares to face the vampire. Our protagonist already foresees the danger and tries to warn Ming about the swordsman's direct strike. Ming ends up being pierced and pushed back by his attack. The swordsman demands they reveal who sent them to attack, questioning who they are. But this excites Ming even more, who starts to laugh insanely. Zheng watches the scene and notices that Ming is becoming increasingly insane. The vampire opens his mouth and his fangs appear. With that, he bites the swordsman's neck forcefully, causing the swordsman to scream loudly while trying to keep his sword steady, until the swordsman finally loses consciousness. Ming releases his victim and lets him fall to the ground while blood drips from the bite. The swordsman falls to the ground, hitting his head hard while Ming displays a strong blue aura. He recognizes that sensation and becomes even more excited. With that, a pair of huge wings appear on his back while his body emits intense energy. Xingyang and Liang get excited about their partner's powers returning, while the master is impressed. With that, they believe they might recover their powers too. The partner comments on how convenient vampire bodies are for being able to recover. She starts to question Ming about the return of his powers and if he knows how he recovered. Ming explains that it was because of the master's awakening, which excites Xingyang, who looks at the master with a hungry gaze. Because this makes her believe she could recover her powers too, and Zheng watches her worried, wondering what she wants to do. But she changes the subject, saying she would take him to a place to rest. She asks him to leave the rest of them while looking at him more gently. Liang questions if Ming would recover better sleeping in a coffin, and he says that life needs a sense of ritual. The zombie responds that he prefers to sleep in his bed. Ming says that he rarely slept in a coffin before and only started doing it because he thought he was becoming human. Liang says that he was no longer a normal person. A voice emerges, asking if they almost had an accident. Bai was observing them and says he was mistaken. Ming responds that it was his mistake, though it doesn't matter, because he believes that only this kind of world could bring them some pleasure. The blind demon acknowledges that the initial vision of the world was a success and says he will interrogate the guest. But Ming says to let Zheng interrogate him, which impresses his partners with his request. Bai believes that the master wouldn't do that and that when the master needs to, he will ask him for help. The vampire reminds that procedures must be followed, and Bai questions if that was the reason Ming recovered his powers. His blind partner says that despite agreeing to act discreetly, he secretly worked on this while leaving the room. Liang starts to question and provoke Ming while they both agree that they cannot abandon the master. Ming believes that his distinguishing feature is having told the master that he wouldn't abandon him, and perhaps his recovery has to do with the master. Since they arrived in that world, they accepted him as the master, and his awakening started a relationship that depends on his trust. With that, Liang and Ming continue discussing the master until Ming asks to close the coffin and Liang leaves. Zheng is in the bath remembering that he didn't feel guilty about the guard's death, and Bai asks him to interrogate his guest. But the master prefers that he does it, and then just tells him the results. The blind man accepts the request, and Xuesan says he could break a few of his teeth if the master wants. Our protagonist imagines that regardless of their actions, that was what he considered right. Or maybe that would just be part of his nature. After 3 hours relaxing without any news, the master gets out of his bath and realizes he fell asleep. At that moment, Lien appears behind him, and Zheng is startled by his ally. Upon recovering, the master asks if the interrogation is over, and Liang says it is not. The two talk, and the master asks what he wanted. The zombie just stares at him without any response, making Zheng sigh. Our protagonist asks him to tell him anything that worries him, because even if he can't do anything, he could at least be a listener if needed, and Liang puts his hand on the master's shoulder. The zombie asks the master not to take the lead next time. Despite not understanding why he was talking about it, the master decides to accept his request and says he trusts all of them. Zheng says he will check the interrogation and that he could do what he wants. Then he leaves the room, leaving Liang there. After standing still for a while, Liang starts to feel his legs giving way until he falls to the ground, sitting and feeling embarrassed for what he did. At that moment, energy starts to emerge from his wound. During an outdoor lunch, Bai comments to the master that this world is different and that makes it more interesting. He asks the master not to worry because he intends to explain it simply. Hizan was in a city called Huchu within a province known as the Yan Kingdom in Baifeng County. Besides this county, there are 6 others, and the capital was in Tianjin County, while Baifeng is on the northern front line. 100 years ago in this region, there was a war between the Yan and the desert bandits involving over 10,000 people. On one hand, the war happened because of the bandits' division, and on the other hand, it was the southern Yan's fault. Additionally, 3 nearby kingdoms were observing, which made the Yan focus on their central lands. Thus, the world was dominated by 4 kingdoms with a few exceptions of some small countries. The master listens to the story and notes that this is important information, and the blind man says there is one more interesting thing. Bai says that this world has 9 levels of power, with 1 being the highest, and explains that the guard from that night doesn't even make it onto this list. Our protagonist imagines that this seemed poorly written, but recognizes that he got excited after witnessing that. They discuss recovering their position, and Zheng understands that for this, they need to take someone out. Of Zheng gets excited and asks his blind ally to explain his plan in detail. The first phase of the plan would be to deliver their forces to the center of Huchua City. After explaining the second part, Bai asks the master to review his plan. Our protagonist praises Bai and his plan, which makes him acknowledge the intelligence of his master. This makes Zheng feel discouraged with so much praise. He asks to be called if he can help with anything, and Bai explains that the subordinates only need his trust. This makes the master even more disheartened. With that, the two begin to discuss how much he trusts his allies, until Bai uses his powers to pick up the leaf from the master's cup. He thanks the master's trust while eating the leaf. This moment makes the master believe he should keep a certain distance from him, because he observes by and notices an intense aura around him. In the afternoon of that day, the master is walking through the inn until he hears noises coming from one of the rooms. The master becomes worried and goes to check what was happening and finds Shuesan adjusting a model of the region. Jung asks if that was a topographic map and catches the dwarf's attention. Shuesan acknowledges the master's intelligence and explains that Bai had asked for help and he had the idea of using the map for future strategies. Our protagonist approaches and hands the hammer to him to continue his work. With that, the master touches his shoulder and asks him to continue his work while he goes to check other places. When the master leaves the room, the dwarf hits his head on the map and ends up having a coughing fit. Because of this, Shuesan slips and loses his balance. But as he is about to hit his back on the floor, he manages to avoid it by lifting himself with his finger, completely excited. The master recognizes that his allies have become strange after the previous night and imagines he needs to know how to deal with them. With that, he approaches a room until he hears a loud, hysterical laugh from Shuesan that worries him. Because of this, the master trips over the entrance and loses his balance, falling face first into Xinyang's breasts, making her ask if the master is okay. The protagonist gets up abruptly, completely blushing, staring at her breasts, and she says she was there to deliver his clothes. She completes by saying that she spent 6 months making various clothes for him, and Xinyang notes that they still fit him. The master says he lost his parents as a child, so he hadn't had anyone make clothes for him for years. Xinyang takes the master's hand and places it on her chest, saying that she can act as his mother if that pleases him. She says he can do whatever he wants with this mother because she is great at acting. With that, he recognizes that compared to all of his allies, he is by far the purest. At that moment, Bai enters the room, interrupting their conversation, which irritates Xinyang, who yells at him for not knocking before entering. She thinks about the great atmosphere they had, and that it was ruined by the blind man, trying to provoke her by knocks on the open door while saying something was happening at the inn's entrance. An army commander says he is going to war, and the empire demands that the Zheng family help transport supplies. The commander already shows little patience, telling them not to even think of excuses because his sword doesn't recognize people. Xinyang explains that Lai had fooled with the merchants, and that Ming was sick and asked what could happen if he infected the tents with tuberculosis. With that, the commander stands up and says to ignore them while Liang and Shuesan are to be recruited. He demands that the two report to the tents outside the city the next day while he leaves being greeted by Xinyang. Our protagonist recognizes that this indeed would be a problem, and Bai appears, saying they have 2 choices. One of them would be to gather their things and leave Huchua during the night, and the master asks what the other would be. The master's allies look at him seriously, considering these options. Zheng recognizes that the inn had been part of their work for almost a year, and the city is important for their plans. But he knows it wouldn't be wise to raise a flag and rebel against the empire, which makes Bai acknowledge his thinking. With that, Bai asks for Shuesan's help because he could be a good support. Xinyang asks why she can't go too to help them, and Bai questions if she would prostitute herself to the soldiers, which irritates her while the blind man explains that they are the master's subordinates and must remove his obstacles. Shuesan says that the master can count on them despite understanding that Zheng doesn't want them to see him as incapable, because he would place himself in a higher position and understand more than they do. At dawn the next day in the arming tents, our protagonist says he was just asked to march with the army and thinks about having been reincarnated and going to war. Liang says there is a problem, and the master asks what he noticed. The zombie mentions that there were no soldiers protecting them and recalls that the orders were for them to transport supplies. He says everything about the soldiers' actions was unknown even though they were about to go to the battlefield. Zheng becomes worried, and with that the dwarf appears in his tent, saying he discovered a problem. Seeing the emergency rations wagon, he discovered it was full of stones. Several days pass since they arrive at the camps, and the demons anticipate that something will happen that night. Liang asks about the tent's location, and the master imagines they should keep an eye on the water supply. Besides that, he believes that if they camp in a canyon, they could protect themselves better by reducing the protection areas. The zombie praises the master, and this makes him think that he is not a good example because he only knows how to praise any decision he makes, but he knows there must be more things he would have to say. Liang says they have a little over 200 cavalry members, most of whom are force recruits. He explains that if the enemies made a stealth attack, the soldiers would have no confidence and the camp would be destroyed. The explanation continues, warning that the cavalry seem more focused on the tents and the master understands that they were bait. Our protagonist realized he couldn't warn his superiors and decides to just focus on protecting himself. He says he wouldn't mind getting some benefits if the conditions permit. That night a soldier was tired of the watch duty, until a barbarian appears behind him and cuts the man to get rid of him. Then another barbarian appears, and they enter the tents while ketchup stains mark the tents. They continue following their plan and move to the next tents until they reach the master's tent. Liang grabs the barbarian's neck and gets rid of his aggressor. His shout draws the attention of the other nearby barbarians, and Susen catches them off guard, taking them out as well. With that, Liang gets rid of his attacker's body while the master observes his allies and orders them to cut off their heads. At that moment, an energy charge arrow flies over the camp and an army of barbarians appears, riding in for the attack while they remember that Bai explained who they were. Chung explains that these barbarians have been rivals of the Yen kingdom for hundreds of years and were not the type to yield. As they arrive at the camp, the barbarians begin a massacre while the master's group hides to protect themselves. He recognizes that they were just bait and that the army should soon arrive to help. Susen asks why they don't take advantage of the chaos to escape, and the master remembers that killing the barbarians could earn them merits. With that, the dwarf acknowledges that his master can be quite sinister. One of the barbarians finds the master's group hiding and charges at them, making Liang prepare to fight. The dwarf positions himself in front of the master along with the zombie, which provokes the barbarian. In a few seconds, he is defeated by Su San in a quick move, while the horse keeps running towards the zombie. At that moment, Liang awakens a power that evokes several energy hands and lands a direct punch on the horse's jaw. With that, the horse is abruptly knocked down, and the zombie throws the barbarian to the ground. Liang calls his master, who simply decapitates the barbarian with a sword strike. With that, he dirties his face with blood, which he wipes off, and upon tasting it, he says it is slightly sweet. The bloodstained sword falls to the ground, and the master steps back, realizing what he just did. But he believes the sensation is not so bad after all. Su San offers a drink to the master, saying that getting used to killing for the first time is difficult despite being enjoyable over time. The master takes the water canteen and splashes it on his face, while imagining that a wolf would never accept his sheep as a leader. If he cannot change their relationship, then let them believe he has everything under control. With this thought, the master retrieves his sword and manages to recover. The barbarian attack continues until a group appears in the distance. Finally, the kingdom's army was approaching to get rid of their enemies. At that moment, a fierce battle begins between the Yen soldiers and the barbarians. The battle intensifies while the group observes the soldiers' movements. Su San gets irritated with the commander's attitude, while Liang acknowledges that it would be difficult to get cavalry soldiers. A spear approaches the group, and the two notice the incoming attack, managing to save the master's life. The group faces the direction of the spear and sees a barbarian observing them. Liang draws his sword and charges at his enemy, jumping to try to decapitate the barbarian. But he intensifies his aura and defends Liang's attack with such effort that it causes an energy collision. Our protagonist orders Su San to help his partner while noting his enemy's focus. The zombie retreats after the attack and realizes that his sword was nearly cut by the heat of the aura. With that, the barbarian gets excited seeing the state of his enemy's weapon and charges at Liang. But the zombie dodges the barbarian's blow and says that it's not a problem because he never knew how to use a sword. His enemy takes advantage of the swing with the tips of his shoulder pad, until he notices that Liang withstood the attack and barely moved. Liang takes advantage of the proximity and lands a direct attack on his enemy's chest. He mentions that he prefers to use his claws to fight while his mask opens its mouth, exhaling energy. An arrow is fired and hits his wrist, distracting Liang to see who his new enemy is. With that, the barbarian takes the opportunity and kicks his chest, throwing him against the hay cart. The barbarian archer warns his ally, saying there was something wrong with Liang, explaining that despite his arrow skills being able to penetrate an unarmored soldier's arm, he barely hit him. At that moment, the dwarf appears behind him, saying he should worry more about himself. Shuesan strikes his daggers into the archer's back, and in a quick motion pulls him to the ground to finish his enemy. The barbarian swordsman despairs at his partner's death and grabs Liang by the neck to lift him. He raises his sword and threatens to kill the unconscious zombie. But then the master quickly approaches to save his partner. The barbarian notices the movement and throws Liang away to try to hit him. Suddenly, the barbarian coughs up blood and imagines he must have been poisoned at some point. Soon he remembers Liang's claw attack and believes it was then that he was poisoned. Zheng takes advantage of the moment and kills the other barbarian before driving his sword into the ground. The master tries to stay on his feet after this move and leans on the sword. Liang approaches him, extending his hand to offer help. Zheng accepts his help and stands up with great effort. At that moment, Liang remembers a conversation where he heard by saying he didn't see the master as someone strong. But he reminds the zombie that Zheng was the one who created them. In a comparison of the real world to a cage, the blind man says the master was trapped and shackled in this cage. Bai explains that they just need to give the master possibilities to evolve and lead them. He believes Zheng has the potential to be someone they will follow. Liang removes the arrow from his arm and warns that the Yen army was taking control of the situation, and Zheng asks to see the results. Xuesen appears, dragging an old man who was the head of the barbarians' expansive division, saying he caught a big fish. The dwarf asks if the old man would be worth more to them alive, but the master says he might have seen what happened and orders him to be killed. While the dwarf prepares his dagger at his neck, the old man calls the master a demon. Xuesen starts laughing and agrees with the old man's statement, just before slitting his throat. After the battle, the place was full of bodies on both sides while the surviving cavalry members search the area, until they find someone in their path, and the commander points his sword at this person. It turns out he had found the master's group, who were holding the head of the barbarian chief. The commander stares at the head in Zheng's hands and recognizes who that man was. He knew the Central Army was after that man and acknowledges their luck for getting such a great merit. But he does not intend to give them this victory and charges at the trio. Xuesen notices that their goal was to steal the trio's merits, and the master prepares for combat. With a smile on his face, the commander proceeds until a blade-shaped beam of light crosses the battlefield. This beam of light hits the commander fully and cuts him in half. The attack was launched by the 7th Elder Escort on the orders of the Marquis of Zhongbei Li Quan. At that moment, the young Marquis points to the trio and orders them to clean themselves and come to her tent. In the tent, they wonder if they would have something to resolve with the general while mocking her for being a woman posing as a man. Xuesen mentions that a woman's status is not so low, and this could be useful to them, as she would be a good partner for the master. But Liang says she is not good enough for him, which makes the dwarf complain about his partner's comment. Liang mentions that beside them, the master can marry the best woman in the world and asks if he has not noticed something. This makes the dwarf understand the connection between the recovery of their powers and their master. His partner remembers that before the master awakened, they were ordinary people and that currently even the master is evolving. With that, the dwarf remembers that he told the master the general was a woman but forgot to mention something. He remembered telling the master not to expect a girl to let him in as he would have a beautiful view. But Liang mentions that if he did, that the general would call her soldiers and they would kill the master, and Xuesen gets disheartened hearing this. Meanwhile, Zheng approaches the general's tent. Upon entering the tent, he kneels to greet the general. Li Quan says they were of great help to them and allows them to choose between two rewards. The first would be to become her personal servant and member of her family, while the other would be to become an officer in the Huchua area. But staring at Zheng, she says she will take him into the Li family, and before she finishes her sentence, the master chooses the second option. With that, the general gets irritated by the answer and asks if he was belittling her family. Zheng says that Huchua is his home, while he imagines it would not be worth it to be taken as the general's servant. For a moment, he remembers Ming's attitude while wondering if any of them would be vegetarians. Meanwhile, the vampire was finishing his mission getting rid of the enemies. He hears that after the hyena gang is done, they would go after the Trinity Union and questions why they were starting the plan without the master. Bai explains that the master should return at any moment, and they were just taking precautions by taking the initiative. Ming removes the weapons embedded in his body and asks about the other gang, saying he does not remember them on the list. His blind partner mentions that he had left that to Xinjiang to handle, and at that moment they begin to hear screams from the inn. The leader of the cart gang was trapped in several wires that begin to strangle him and hang him in the air. He tries to fight the trap and asks what she had done to them while Sinyong watches the scene of her target. She begins to savor the water from the teapot while observing them and wonders if the master has already finished his fight. Meanwhile, the master's partners say they can reach Huchu in a day and that he does not need to worry about the inn. The group is in the middle of the desert, making an outdoor fire. Shuesen says he is worried about his friend Lai and wonders if he managed to eat enough. Ignoring the story's direction, Zheng asks them to rest after eating until they hear the sound of footsteps and the two demons notice someone approaching. The group stands up ready for combat while a woman appears asking for shelter and to share the place with them. This woman was a barbarian followed by 2 men and 2 children. The barbarians make a fire, keeping separate from them until the water canteen in her hands. Zheng tries to refuse the drink, saying that the wind was cold and his throat was sore. He does not trust the barbarians after what happened and imagines she should drink first to prove it was not poison. The woman sits down again and introduces herself as the chief of the barbarians, Royal Hall Avi, while drinking from the canteen. Then she says the children were grandchildren of the Shakuo tribe leader, and she traveled all this way from the royal hall to rescue them. Zheng prepares his sword and notes that she is an enemy as the Shakuo tribe barbarians were lured into the trap by the Li family. Avi stands up and hands the canteen to her partner and asks if they were members of the Li family because of the horses. At that she acknowledges the Marquis power, believing they were trying to intercept them. But Zheng mentions that there was a misunderstanding in this whole story until the canteen starts to emanate energy when thrown. Soon the barbarians next to the leader begin to suffer the effects of the poison, while she uses a curse to manipulate the corpses. With that, the dead barbarian rides emanating her energy and stare at the group with a ravenous look and pointed teeth. Zheng mentions that he knew something was wrong with her while the trio prepares to face them. But at that moment the master decides to provoke Liang by saying that they were his relatives and asks if he is not going to say hello. The zombie barbarians charge at the trio to kill them, and Liang removes his mask and shows his teeth. It launches a roar filled with energy at them, and his energy starts to affect the leader's control. Avi recognizes that Liang broke her control and wonders how he managed it. The leader decides to check Liang's story and activates the barbarian Avi's curse. With this she notices something wrong in Liang as she sees a powerful and intense aura. He was not controlling the barbarian corpses as they only submitted to the demon's wishes. Liang uses his roar and manages to control the barbarian corpses and makes them attack their leader. Ai dodges the attack from the first barbarian while the second she counters with a punch and knocks him down. Foreseeing greater dangers, she hubs the children who wake up as Shuesen appears behind her. When he intends to strike his daggers against the leader, she uses her ability again. In a quick move, she expels the dwarf away from them while raising her cloak to protect them. Shuesen tries to see his target covered by the cloak, looking for a gap without any success. Noticing something wrong with that cloak, the dwarf is forced to land and complains, telling her not to run away. But the barbarian leader shows that she did not run away, which surprises the dwarf, who asks if she was not educated. Then she charges at Zheng to get rid of the master while holding the children. Our protagonist did not imagine she would charge at him, which makes it easier for him to get rid of her. Zheng tries to land a direct attack against her until the leader throws one of the children in front of the master to distract him. The master faces that move in the child's crying face, and he turns his blade to return the child. However, this allows the leader to grab the blade and use it to point at Zheng's neck and starts pressing, trying to cut him. The master recognizes that she has a lot of strength and feels her pressure until the zombies controlled by Liang charge at the woman. As they try to hit her, the leader releases the sword and dodges the attacks, which impresses the master. He looks up and sees the barbarian leader above them preparing to attack. But Shuesen tries again to hit her from behind, and this time his attack works, hitting her back with one of the daggers. She tries to get away and kicks the dwarf while fleeing from him. Shuesen chases her, saying she would not be able to escape. But Liang tells him not to chase her, which impresses him. The zombie reveals that controlling her corpses left him at his limit, and he had no more strength to fight while the corpses dissolve. He adds, asking if he chases her, who will protect the master. Shuesen returns to the master's side and starts praising him for being able to predict the barbarian's actions. At that moment, the master questions if the dagger was poisoned, and the dwarf just smiles, calling the master mean. In the middle of the desert far from the trio, the barbarian still had the dagger in her back and starts feeling unwell from the exhaustion and poison. She says that even though she was poisoned, she still needs to complete the royal family's mission. Someone appears to find the barbarian abandoned and asks what she was doing there. A group of men followed by Fan asks where the young master was. Demon shouts at the men, ordering them to bring the troops immediately as the Marquise's men were nearby. The men run off while Fan continues to stare at her. He looks at the dagger in her back and recognizes the weapon. The barbarian gets irritated and asks what he is looking at. Then he pulls out his axe and says he is looking at her. Later at the master's camp, Fan joined the group and mentions recognizing Shwesan's dagger. He explains that the dwarf had been sharpening that dagger for half a year, and the master asks if Fan killed the barbarian, while he confirms. Our protagonist starts thinking about the luck he had at the caravan he was following had a spy, and that he would meet the barbarian on the way. Zhang acknowledges that he could not kill the children and would only ask for forgiveness if any generation of demons came for revenge. The giant handsome leaves to Shwesan and says that they make him very energetic since he himself had been eating them for days. Shwesan realizes that simple people have a simple lifestyle. At the inn, an envoy from Baifeng County named Su Wenxiu was waiting to be received. He asks if they believe that the Marcus and the young lady could have survived. One of the staff mentions that they had sent Zheng, who was recommended by the young lady. But the envoy says that Zheng was a commoner and asks if he would dare join the rebellion when the Marcus was in danger. Su Wenxiu mentions that if he has the ability to mobilize the troops, then he will recognize his abilities. Upon returning to the inn, the master is startled because the place was completely empty and he wonders where everyone was. An old man comes running out of the inn and asks if the owner has returned. Zheng asks what happened, and the old man asks him to calm down, explaining that Xinyang and Bai bought another house. Their explanation was that after getting more money, they wanted Mu to have a bigger garden. They mentioned that an official's salary doubles according to his rank, and they should start by showing sincerity. In their new residence, the group comments about getting rid of the hyena gang that was involving human trafficking. Ming asks why they ended up with the money that the Three Gods Association gave. Bai says that since the master does not care about religion, they do not need to either, and Xinyang remembers that his story was cancelled. Xinyang says that with business going well it will not worry about money, and asks if it would not be easy to make money with soap. Then Bai stares at Xinyang while she drinks sake until someone shouts announcing that the master has arrived, which excites her. Our protagonist goes to relax in the bath while being attended to by three beautiful girls. Meanwhile, the demons gather at the table to eat. Xinyang mentions that she prepared his bath, and the others start discussing the provocations he made with the girls. The blind demon mentions that the master can always try the fruits of his team and that they can give him a chance to choose. But Ming immediately tells him not to extend these ideas too much because if the master gets sad, he will make Bai regret it. At this moment, Jing arrives and says that since they have already eaten, they could go back to work. Shwesan starts telling about his adventures and talks about the master foiling the barbarian's plan, which impresses Xinyang. While the dwarf continues his story, the book, and gets disheartened seeing how much they were flattering him. Bai says that his subordinates wanted to form a bandit group and did not expect the master to gain recognition. Jing remembers that the blind demon had the power of spiritual detection, which allowed him to perceive that he was almost asleep. He mentions that he will leave the development of the establishment with Bai, and the focus will still be the city of Huchua. Liang says they cannot waste the 300 horses delivered to the city. Bai mentions that this is the most important thing to think about, because even though the army is in the name of the Yen Empire, they are loyal to the master. He mentions that Saner and Ale should be annexed, and leaves this mission to Shwesan, and Fan Li Xinyang receives the mission to train the new girls and select the best for special training. Liang receives the mission to train with the master while they wait to go to Yemen, and says that he should let the master give him tips. Bai says that he has already given the orders and asks the master to correct what he deems necessary, and he just says that Bai has already said everything he wanted. Then Ming asks what he should do now. The blind demon says that the vampire's mission is the most important and provokes him by saying he had not seen him, so he forgot. He explains that to feed the 300 horses it will require money, and Ming asks what he should do. Bai says that he should get some soap, and Ming is speechless hearing that while staring at the blind demon. After 3 days of training, the master acknowledges that his physical strength was increasing. He asks his zombie partner if he wants to take a bath together, and Liang mentions that he does not like hot water. With that, the master says he will talk to Xingyang then. Ming and Xingyang, who were approaching, talk about the idea of making money by making soap and perfumes. She mentions that with this they could either make a lot of money quickly or never make any. Until she turns to the training partners and notices that the master was no longer there. Xingyang runs off complaining to Ming, saying that she forgot to give the master a massage because of him. As she runs off calling for the master, Ming just watches her incredulously. The two demons stare at each other, and Ming asks if his zombie partner's aura has increased. But he responds that it has not, saying that perhaps the problem is themselves. Ming imagines that relying on their own hard work would not be enough, and believes that they need to seek other means to recover their powers while staring at soap they made. After staring at it for a while, Ming mentions that he had made that soap and Liang could use it. When Liang bends down to pick up the soap, finds them and imagines that they have become very close. The two turn to him and ask what he wants, and mentions that they will have a meeting at the pavilion at night. With the notice given, the blind demon continues on his way, saying that they can continue what they were doing. Still mentioning that fortunately he is blind, so he saw nothing. Meanwhile, Xingyang is massaging the master while complaining about the treatment Liang gave the master during training. She asks if there would be a better way to train, and Zhang mentions that he has no problem training the muscles. His partner questions if it would be a good idea to ask Ming to bite him and turn him into a vampire, which makes him curious about the idea. At the start of the meeting, they mention that the topic is cultivation and ask Liang to comment on the master's cultivation in the past few days. He starts the explanation saying that although the master does not possess combat skills, he has a lot of strength. Even considering that it has been less than a month since his awakening, which could hinder his recovery. The blind demon says that he believes there is a relationship between his powers and the master, except that there is a problem with that. His recovered powers cannot be developed in any way, and Xingyang asks what he has discovered. His theory said that their powers work like an online game where they are tied to the master's strength without ever being able to surpass his level. Liang imagines that in this theory the master would be level 1. Ming understands that the master's strength depends on himself, while the demons have their powers limited by the master. Bai confirms the explanations of the two partners, but Fanli wonders if he had cut the master would the limitation have been removed. His comment makes all the demons curious and worried. Liang mentions that they are normal people at the moment and decided to let the master decide his actions, and they would just protect him. But now that they are recovering their powers, they are getting insatiable. With that, he fills everyone's cups with wine and says that he knows it is not the best to say anything, and asks them to drink together and promise to completely forget what they just said and any ideas that came to their minds. Everyone agrees and drinks the wine together to seal the promise. Bai reminds them that if the master dies, all the demons will cease to exist, and with that the only way to increase their powers is to help him. But he acknowledges that their system is not good for the master to evolve, which creates the need for a teacher for him. Xingyang asks if the blind demon was calling only them to prevent the master from knowing about the teacher's idea. Ming asks why he did not say any of this before, and Shuesen complains that he embarrassed everyone. The blind demon says he did not expect Fan Li to say something like that, and the giant wonders if it was his fault. The next day, Xingyang and Fan Li are observing the scenery in the middle of the mountains. The master's partner says that she asked her maid to tell the master to wait for their return, and asks if Bai is sure the teacher they are expecting would have passed by there. Bai mentions that they talked about it the night before and already found their target, while Shuesen understands that he had planned all this. The blind demon reminds them that he had spoken about the captain's wife who asked for water to help her fertility. Shuesen repeats some words, pretending to understand exactly what he said. He explains that her maid talked about a captured bandit who was a martial artist about to be taken to the neighboring city. Because he is a martial artist, they believe he would be a good teacher for the master, although he is debilitated. But Bai just gives a long speech praising luck and destiny being on their side for getting a teacher for the master. While Fan Li gazes at the horizon looking for signs of their target, Shuesen complains to Bai about the speech. At this moment, a horse appears beside them, and the master meets his allies. Zhang admits he heard Bai's shout and asks if they need to be so anxious. The master imagines that people look to talk to acquaintances to find teachers while they just rob armed people. Shwesen thinks of saying something until he is interrupted by the blind demon. Bai explains that his base is spread out, and this would make many more people appear. While he tries to explain that they will depend on their strength, Zhang just says they decide what to do. The blind demon worries that the master will learn about the limitation he causes in his allies and end up having the same thought as Fan Li. With that, Bai organizes the plan, saying that everyone will get involved in the current plan. At this, his allies realize he treated the master as just another member of the group. Shwesen warns that he found a group of people eyeing their target and that this could cause more problems. Bai mentions that they need the master's decision to act, and he replies that it seems difficult to hire a teacher these days. The army of soldiers takes their prisoner in a cage through the mountains. At this, he mentions that the mantis hunts while a sparrow is behind him and questions if it is better to be the sparrow. During the night, the soldiers' caravan suffers an enemy attack. Captain Wang Lai says they are soldiers of the Fong Lu, and he knows their closeness with the barbarians, and the bandit tells him to release his soldiers. Wang Li ignores the bandit's advice, who reminds him that his daughter-in-law is pregnant and he should not die for nothing. As the battle intensifies, the bandit tries to save the captain's life. Ding Ru was imprisoned and wonders why the captain is worried, as he could survive. He feels something strange, and a loud noise starts to sound, affecting all the enemies. Bai appears on the battlefield using an instrument while wondering where he could find a friend in this world. The bandits charge at him to kill him, and Sinying starts laughing at their naivety. She uses her threads to strangle and decapitate the bandits. At the same time, her allies get rid of the other enemies while Fong Li takes the prisoner. But meanwhile, the captain is facing the bandit leader and has been severely wounded. The captain's wound causes him to fall to the ground unconscious. After getting rid of the captain, the bandit charges at Bai, who prepares to face him and play his instrument. But the bandit simply explodes in front of him. Ding Ru recognizes that the bandit was at the mid-9th rank for having defeated the captain and wonders how Bai killed him so easily. Fong Li receives Bai's order to leave, and he runs off the field carrying the prisoner. The captain uses his last strength to approach Bai and asks him to pass a message to his wife. Bai says he will take care of his wife and that he should not worry. Far from the battlefield, the master tries to see if his allies are returning from their mission. After a while waiting, he is impressed by a shadow emerging from the battle smoke. Fong Li appears running insanely while carrying the prisoner. Our protagonist turns and orders the giant to place the prisoner on the horse to escape. But the giant just runs past the master and keeps running, making Zheng try to ask Fong Li to wait for him. Upon returning to their base, Bai and Xian Yang inform that although it took some time to get rid of the enemies, Fong Li was already carrying the prisoner. Our protagonist remembers to keep asking the giant to release the teacher, while Bai praises him for getting a teacher. However, while he is relieved to have gotten a teacher, Shwesen says he has bad news. As the giant was very excited when he returned to the city, this ended up making the prisoner faint. Zheng cannot believe what he just saw and thinks is just a joke. The next day, the blind demon examines the teacher while the master asks how his pulse is. Bai informs the master that he was actually a psychiatrist. Zheng mentions that maybe that guy will not work because he is not breathing and has no pulse, which makes Bai consider burying him. But he says it would be a waste just to bury him and asks if it would not be good to make fertilizer from him like the previous enemies. The master agrees with the idea and says he does not feel very comfortable with Bai, probably because he is not as strange as he is. At that moment, the prisoner manages to wake up, which makes Bai say he was helped by the heavens. Bai mentions that he needed to negotiate things with the teacher, and the master asks to leave that to his subordinates. With that, the blind demon tries to talk about the teacher's martial skills. He mentions that if the teacher could teach martial arts to the master, it could ensure his safety. The prisoner asks when he agreed to be the master's teacher. Xinyan gets irritated and says she has seen many heroes turning into mere cowards after being tortured. Bai reminds her this prisoner is the master's teacher, and Zheng himself trusted them to convince him to accept the request. He mentions that 2 days ago Captain Wang Li's wife gave him money for a divination. With that, he says they could go kill his whole family, which leaves Ding Ru worried. But Bai simply says it was just personal business and asks what he has to say. The professor accepts the request while remembering that the captain's daughter-in-law was pregnant and he died trying to save him. Bai tells the master's partner that killing a family would be too severe a punishment and that the master would not agree with it. He adds that Dingru would stay there. If he successfully completes his task, they would compensate him, giving him the possibility to recover his cultivation from before he was injured, and the professor believes to be a lie. The blind demon says they tend to be very generous with their allies, by promises that the day the master starts cultivation he will recover and could take revenge on the Fengli family. He also mentions that he can establish a good relationship with the master, and with that the demons could help him in his revenge. As they move away from the professor, Bai tells Xingyang that they should try to convince people with kindness and not with torture. She replies that he has said that before. Stoshi reprimands Bai asking how he dares to threaten Wang Li's family just to convince him. But Bai asks if it wasn't appropriate to threaten Wang Li's family after he died protecting Dingru. Xingyang gives a sadistic smile while acknowledging that it was indeed appropriate. She asks if this threat included the child that his daughter-in-law was expecting. The blind demon replies that the child is not his, and Xingyang teases him, asking if he explains that the most he did was make her drink a water charm to regulate her emotions, and with that she managed to get pregnant. Xingyang feels relieved, saying she imagined he would still leave a child, and he replies that he is pure and kind while she is dirty and evil. Bai asks her to call Ming over there because he needed to ask him to map the professor's energy circulation, and Xingyang warns that if the needle got stuck in his body it would hurt. He asks if she could hold back, and she replies no while showing excitement. In the examination room it is mentioned that each family has its own martial arts method, and they need it to have chai in an empty kangu. Xingyang disperses kangu over Ming's body, and then she begins to mark lines with her needle. Bai explains that after getting chai in the kangu it would divide into 5 directions. The directions would be the limbs and the head, and Ming anticipates that if Xingyang is not careful he will die. Dingru worries about Ming asking if they could just make a drawing, and Bai says it would not be a good enough reference. Bai explains how the process works by instructing to concentrate the body's chai to accelerate. After a few cycles the body's functions will accelerate and make the kangu shine. The professor explains that if it shines he will have the power of a small army leader, and that it took him 10 years to reach the 9th rank. With that, Bai orders him to follow the map route in his body, while Ming remembers that he is a vampire and doesn't know what he was talking about. Bai explains that even without understanding, Ming still knows how to control the blood, and he just needs to accelerate circulation to create chai. Ming admits that he couldn't disagree with him and accepts the idea. Dingru tries to warn that he cannot rush and must go slowly because the risks are high. But Ming ignores his warning and starts to charge his energy. The professor is impressed with Ming's power because he was at the mid-9th rank of chai. Xingyang is next in line and evokes a pink energy, which she ends up liking despite Ming teasing her by calling her a young girl. She complains to him, saying she is much better than his red. Bai asks Ming not to dress yet because he wanted to test something, and the vampire asks what difference it makes if he wouldn't be able to see him. He replies that life needs a sense of ceremony. After touching Ming's belly, the vampire Bai evokes a rouge energy and says he liked the exclusive color of the old Inbei. The other demons arrive in the room and see the professor's circulation system, and Bai says they can test it too. Liang shows a purple chai and Ming argues with Xingyang mentioning the soap scene. Tu-san reveals a green cube and is disappointed, hoping to change the color. The master's partner teases him, saying it is a natural color that will help him stay hidden. At that moment they hear a scream. Fan Lai activates his golden key while the dwarf tells him not to overdo it. Bai says that for now they are stuck at the mid-9th rank, and although it is not difficult for them, they still cannot push themselves because they still have an invisible barrier that prevents them from evolving further, and they know what they must do next. The mission now is to do whatever it takes to help the master evolve. The next day in the afternoon they explain to the master how they pass on the martial arts lineage, but he asks what he should have learned. He remembers that the most he heard were theories and saw several lines on Ming's body, and he asks how much they overestimate him. Zheng still stares at the professor, imagining that he is just a normal person. Bai asks the professor if there is not an external stimulant to help the master have a direction to follow. Dingru mentions that many cannot feel the qi and use wuxi powder to stimulate the evil chai which affects the human body. With that, Bai orders Liang to use his evil chai to stimulate the master's meridians, and he mentions that it might hurt a bit. Liang uses his qi concentrated in one finger to stimulate Zheng. Zheng acknowledges that he feels sore and numb as his body starts to have his nerves bulge. At that moment, the master feels his energy rising until he starts foaming at the mouth from the effort. The demons worry about this and tell Liang to stop. Ming asks if he ended up poisoning the master, and Liang says he knows he couldn't let the corpse poison enter his body. Xingyang tries to lift the master while calling out to him without success. She gets angry with Liang and says that Bai ordered him to stimulate him with the evil qi and not almost cause Alzheimer's to him. Liang says that this would not be possible, and he did not inject so much evil qi into the master, and his current strength would not be that terrible. The professor imagines that the master's body had very dense qi, which acted as fuel being incinerated by evil qi. Bai believes that then the master's body has a good aptitude for practicing martial arts. With that, they believe it was not a waste of aptitude, and that the master could indeed be very powerful. Our protagonist goes back to resting while Bai watches him. When he starts to wake up, Bai asks if he could feel qi, and he replies that he felt the qi thick and swollen. Dingru explains that initially the user would only feel the blood as a thread, so him feeling the circulation thick and swollen is a good thing. Bai thinks about praising the master until the demons appear and congratulate him on his extraordinary talent. Everyone is happy not letting Bai praise the master before them, but Jung asks them to speak more quietly. During the night, Bai asks why Xuesan went to see the professor. The dwarf says he went to ask for food that would increase abilities because he believes they might help the master evolve. Bai warns that the consequences of this might be to trap the master at this level, which would also trap them. He also warns that it's better not to try giving drugs to the master, and Xuesan says it was just an emergency plan. At this, the blind one acknowledges that they were trying too hard even though he is not sure when Mo1 might awaken. Xuesan asks what that has to do with Mo1. Bai explains that if they keep pushing the master too much, he might end up isolating himself with Mo1. But the dwarf says he recognizes that he is very intelligent, but doesn't know much about Mo1's personality and habits. He asks if Bai knows why Mo1 didn't remove his own seal, which piques the blind one's curiosity. Xuesan's theory is that if Mo1 awakens, the first thing he would do is kill the master. Then he would question if he deserved to be his father. Meanwhile, Zheng is resting in an outdoor bath next to Sinian. She says the best grapes are the small ones with a creamy flavor, while Zheng tells her not to say perverted things. His partner asks if he felt pressured, and he says that although he doesn't feel good with evil qi, he doesn't feel pressured. Sinian asks if he would like a massage, and he says he will get wet and then rest for the next day's training. With that, she moves away while remembering that the master was a solitary and sensitive author of manhwas, and that hasn't changed. She notes that they might seem very oppressive to the master, and wonders if she should tell him. Zheng notes how much he struggled to improve his skills, and finds it strange that he is their respected master. At this moment, Mo1's stone appears in the water, and the master stares at the stone with a light sigh. As Zheng gets out of the water, he calls Mo1's son and says that the father misses him. At that, the stone starts to shine and emanate an increasingly strong and intense energy. Bai, who is writing something in his room, feels the presence of this energy. He recognizes that this energy belonged to Mo1. At the same time, he notices the strong murderous intent it emanates and wonders if it is against him or the master. The next day, Zheng goes to the city and asks how many people returned from their mission, and Xingyang mentions that 300 people returned. She explains that with so many losses, Huchu plans to do something, and the master says they aim to maintain taxes with refugees. Liang says that the magistrate ordered him to appear in court before Num, and the master asks if something is wrong. When he gets there, he receives the merits and Bai praises him for getting the official position, and they imagine what they could do with it. Bai asks if he was called because of the orphan issue, and the master explains that since there are many, they want to assign them to officials. While making a cigarette, Bai asks him to reconsider the idea of adopting orphans. Although Liang remembers that this wouldn't be his choice, and they would be distributed according to influence, Bai says there would be few. The zombie asks how many he would like, and Bai mentions that he would like to adopt all of them because his plan is to create an orphanage with them, and Liang thinks he's gone mad. But he explains that he wants to cultivate the new generation too. Even if they might get weak orphans, it could be useful to win people's hearts. Zheng gets excited and says it's easy to understand when he explains it that way. But he says there's still a lot of work to be done. The professor tells Zheng to finish the training that day to not overdo it while he asks when he will be able to maintain the shine. Dingru warns that there's no need to rush because he should reach half of the 9th grade in 3 days and maybe reach the grade in 2 months. Jung tells his professor to rest early, as he plans to continue his training the next day. As Jung gets dressed and leaves, the professor reflects on his talent, noting that even though Zheng's abilities are not on par with the demons, they are exceptional. The professor also wonders about the mysterious sect that sent Jung to them, considering how they seem to be nurturing him rather than the other way around. In Master Bai's room, Bai updates Jung on the demons' missions, mentioning the products they're working on and plans to hire more people. Jung asks if only 3 demons were strong enough for the mission, and Bai explains that he instructed them to act only when absolutely sure. He adds that they should return with information within a month. When Jung says he doesn't fully understand, Bai reassures him that by the time the demons return, Jung should have reached the 9th grade in his training. To tease Jung, the blind demon Bai suggests that starting the next day, Xingyang will sleep in Zheng's bed to stay by his side and protect him. Jung disagrees, saying it's unnecessary, but Bai insists it will lighten her burden if Jung reaches the 9th grade. After some back and forth, Bai reminds Jung to keep Mo Stone close and announces that he needs to prepare for a trip. As Bai leaves the room, he hears an angry voice echo in his mind. Meanwhile, Xingyang vents about being stuck with extra work, like reading letters, and wonders why she has to deal with it all. Bai playfully mocks her, suggesting she start writing letters since everyone else is away. This only annoys her further, and she complains about being left behind while others are out on missions. Bai jokingly calls her a battery capable of replacing 6 people, which irritates her even more. Later that night, Jung asks Xingyang to finish his massage early so he can rest. However, she takes advantage of being alone in the inn with him, insisting she needs to stay by his side and will sleep in the same bed to fulfill her duty. She mentions that if Bai were around, she'd feel less stressed. Jung asks if the situation isn't depressing for her, which causes her to burst into tears, asking if he hates her so much that he doesn't even want to share a bed. Feeling guilty, Jung agrees they can sleep together, saying it doesn't bother him. Excited, Xingyang rushes off to grab clothes and asks Jung to choose what he prefers her to wear. Jung admits to himself that he isn't immune to her charms, especially since her massages and his rigorous training leave him feeling more energized. Suddenly, Mo Stone falls in front of Jung, triggering intense headaches that cause him to faint. Xingyang returns in a black nightgown, joking to herself that Mo might call her mother when he wakes up. However, her clothes begin to transform into paper, alarming her. The paper swirls around her, charged with energy, until it explodes. Amidst the chaos, a massive hand emerges and traps Xingyang. The powerful energy emanates from Mo Stone, which is awakening. Xingyang recognizes the sealed presence of Mo and hears him ask if she wants him to call her. And that's where our story ends for now. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.